At Metropole TVKE across all your social media platforms. I am at Kiange Simba. Let's get the conversations going on this morning. This is your official economic review. We're telling you exactly what it is that you're waking up to this morning in terms of your biggest economic headlines. We're joined by Arnold Nkosale, who's a microfinance banker and economic analyst. We're also going to be joined shortly by Gabriela Mwendwa, who's an investment professional. Fantastic. These are your headlines. Now, Kenya Power will be forced to look for its fourth CEO in 4 years as the power distributor announced Wednesday of the resignation of Bernard Ngugi. Bernard Ngugi, who was at the helm of the company for a short 3 years that was scheduled to end in October 2022, has been replaced by Rosemary Oduor in an acting capacity. Sources familiar with Kenya Power's affairs told local newspaper Business Daily that Mr. Ngugi quit over differences with the Vivian Yeda-led board that was chosen in November last year, that was behind the company's management strategy to review tariff rates, increase tariff rates upwards that officials believed would lift Kenya Power out of the red. Mr. Ngugi had formally written a petition to remove him from office in 2020 on grounds of integrity issues after the Labor Relations Court dismissed the case in November 2020 when he was the general manager for supply chain. He was also one of the few who remained at the company after the procurement scandal forced 10 others out, including his predecessor, Ken Tavros. Good. Let's look at where Kenya Power is in terms of the performance this morning before we cross over to Arnold. Let's look at where they are in terms of that profitability trend. And I'm going to say that things have been good for them all the way from 2015. Now you can see that they were drooping all the way from 2015, 2016 up to where they are and at that negative and 2020. Funny enough, if you look at their key performance indicators, again, you're going to say that the revenue keeps on increasing, yes, but where they really get hit is when you put down EBIT and the loss for the year together, as when you start seeing Kenya Power really now getting into those questions. But then, when you look at these results again, and then you see that this company is now looking for their fourth CEO in 4 years, then it begins to make sense. Arnold, this is a public company that is looking for their fourth CEO in 4 years. I mean, it's not something that we have not seen in the running of majority of the public companies. You could talk about KQ, you could talk about KPA. Now, Kenya Power again is looking for their CEO. What is going on? Where do you put it at?
Simba, for this opportunity once more. I think with Kenya Power, Kenya Power has been going through what you would call corporate civil war for quite some time.
Yes.
I think Kenya Power, for the longest time, was one of the most profitable entities in the country. Even the Kenya Power stock at some point in time was among the NSE 20. But during the course of, you would say probably from 2017 going onwards, Kenya Power started experiencing issues to do with, first of all, there are power purchase agreements with KenGen. And then, of course, things to do with procurement issues and also aspects to do with general management. So if you look at what happened back in 2017, 2018, Kenya Power had a lot of suppliers, and what they did initially, they used to do a lot of fragmentation of contracts, so to speak. So what they would do, they would have massive contracts, then have a lot of suppliers, which essentially was designed to enable SME contractors be in a position to tap into Kenya Power contracts. But along the way, I think we had a lot of issues, particularly when during Ken Taru's tenure, there was a lot of insider trading whereby a lot of Kenya Power employees actually had companies companies which were contracted parties.
Yes.
So that led to a lot of conflict of interest. And then there were a lot of squabbles as far as contractual obligations and contractual structures were concerned. Somewhere along the way, they also started experiencing things to do with contract issues. You would have situations whereby you have participation, open participation for local contractors and international contractors, and you'd have a flurry of activities for the mega contracts being awarded to international contractors and so on and so forth. So Kenya Power has been going through a lot of issues. So by the time Ken Tarus and his team were being ousted out, you had a situation whereby all the general managers plus the CEO were replaced, which was a very dire situation for the entity. And that's when even aspects to do with their capital expenditure started going up. The power purchase agreements with KenGen started coming under the spotlight. And you had a situation whereby things at Kenya Power started going downhill.
Yeah.
Now, when Ngugi came in, he was meant to streamline Kenya Power. And when he came in, list of contractors, you
yes,
over 10 that when some guys were up in arms, he was taken to task, but he somehow maneuvered through it. Now, with these developments, they came as a surprise because his contract was supposed to run until October 2022. But for some reason, it looks like, again, they have to replace management. Now, as it sits, a lot still has to be done at Kenya Power, including sorting out the contractor listing, looking at their capital expenditure, and also renegotiation of their power purchase agreements with KenGen.
Yes.
If you look at KenGen's balance sheet, KenGen have been doing very well. KenGen have been doing very well, and it reached a point whereby they are even mooting a situation whereby they could produce and even supply power. That would have put Kenya Power in a very ugly place. But I think that is something which has been shelved for now, just as part of a way to preserve KPLC. But as it sits, KPLC is still in doldrums, and it looks like the new or the acting CEO will have a lot on their plate just to try and reorganize the organization.
Interesting, because that's where my question comes from. I mean, Arnold, when you look at Bernard Ngugi, when he took over that seat at Kenya Power 3 years ago, I mean, we celebrated and then said, well, this is a guy who's been at the head of procurement, so he knows exactly what the company needs. He knows exactly what the company was hemorrhaging a lot of money. But then he comes in as an insider, and 3 years down the line, I mean, Kenya Power hasn't turned around. And now, this lady who's in charge now, Rosemary Oduor, is also another insider. Do you think we're trying to find solutions for Kenya Power? Because we also know that the government has a lot of focus on the company, that they want to turn around the fortunes of Kenya Power. Is this conflict of interest? I mean, it is a listed company, for crying out loud. Why do we have a lot of government interference in it?
Okay. I think government interference is purely because of the stake the government owns at Kenya Power.
Yes.
As much as it was a listed company, it's keen to observe that it has been suspended from trading by the Capital Markets Authority.
Yes.
That's number one. And then number two, I think the government is trying as much as possible to align Kenya Power partly to the Big Four agenda in terms of bolstering the manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, it's not going on very well, and I think they may need to bring an outside party just to try and harmonize the situation because I think they've been trying to look at internal solutions, which ordinarily, if you're bringing changes in an organization, it's the prudent way to go about it.
Yes.
You get internal solutions who are familiar with the culture, who are familiar with the operational issues to do the organization, and then probably you gradually change. But as it sits with Kenya Power, they've tried that since 2017, and I feel that at this moment in time, they may need to look at external sources of intervention. Probably someone who has who has experience in the energy industry, maybe someone from ERC or maybe someone from KenGen, just to try and stabilize the ship as it sits. Apart from issues to do with their power purchase agreements with KenGen and other parties, they also have a lot of hemorrhage in collection
Yes.
of bills, electrical bills. You have situations whereby most of the massive power consumers, like manufacturing companies, manufacturing entities, at some point in time started turning to solar to get to power their factories and whatnot. So that also have really dented Kenya Power's revenue streams. And at some point in time, the government has had to do interventions through legal means, through legislative means, just to try and balance that situation, because it reached a point in time where most manufacturing entities started actually going towards solar. And then at some point in time, we started seeing solar becoming a bit expensive, just to try and curb the situation. So with Kenya Power, I think they may need to look at, they may need to start looking at external interventions,
Yes.
just to try and steady the ship.
You say external interventions, but then Arnold, somebody looking at Kenya Power right now would say, well, their problems are entirely on those power purchase agreements. We do know that there's a task force that was actually formed to look into that issue and put Kenya Power to task as why they are actually getting more power than they actually need within the economy. That's one area. Number two as well, come in and revise those power tariffs. Because I was looking at that story at a Business Daily that was saying that an insider actually knows very well that the reason as to why Bernard Ngugi actually fell out with that board again is because they're the ones behind the drive to increase power tariffs within the economy. A move that we did see actually was shut down a couple of weeks ago. Arnold, revise those tariffs. Would you get Kenya Power out of the red?
Yeah, it's actually possible, and it's more of a balancing act.
Yes.
And here's how it works.
Yes.
I think anytime you see a government procuring entity trying, or a government parastatal, so to speak, either increasing its fees or trying to adjust its fees, it's primarily because of the exchequer.
Yes.
The exchequer will at times put their revenue obligations on some of the biggest procuring entities in the country. Now, the juggling act comes when you have two options. Option number one, you either increase your tariffs and increase your revenue. However, in most cases, that normally doesn't work because it normally puts people out of business. Option number two is find a balance whereby you have reasonable tariffs and you collect more. You put tariffs which would enable manufacturers to have to continue as far as going concern in business is concerned, and at the same time you have tariffs which are sustainable.
Yes.
I think that's the actual word, sustainable tariffs. I think if Kenya Power can actually get to a level whereby they have sustainable tariffs, they'll be in a position to steady the ship as far as generating revenue is concerned. Because
Yes.
if you talk to anyone in the manufacturing industry, they'll say cost of business is high. And if you look at their costs, part of what is very high is cost of power. So if Kenya Power can be in a position to come up with tariffs which are friendly and sustainable,
Yes.
they will be in the long run. They'll be in a position to get to a level where they have a steady and sustainable revenue. That
much.
coupled with the usual retail revenue that they get from you and me when we consume.
Yes,
power.
Arnold, but I'm sorry to cut you short because then we need to understand where we are. Arnold, that would only mean for Kenya Power that they have to review them upwards. Already that conversation of, power and energy in the country is quite expensive. I mean, the only way for them, therefore, is to review it upwards because, Arnold, we're reading also that report that was released by Kenya Power. They're also saying that this rural electrification program to personal consumers in the country is not working for them because it looks as if the rural areas in the country where the government has been stressing that investment to go toward is that they're not using power enough for Kenya Power to even cut even on that amount of money they're using to actually supply power to them. So that would mean, therefore, Arnold, that the rest of us who use power, those people who run industries and the smaller businesses, have to be taxed more again for Kenya Power to realize something out of their business.
Yeah, I think now when you look at, you've raised a very crucial point, and I think coverage is very important. The footprint of power supply in the country is extremely important when you're looking to increase your revenues.
Yes.
Now, what the government did, the government at some point in time back in from 2010 up to 2015, and then
Yes.
coming on from 2015 up to 2020, the government started what we call the Last Mile Connectivity Program, which was being run by the Rural Electrification Authority, which is currently REREC, Rural Renewable Energies Authority, something of the sort. Now, what happened? The government was supposed, the REREC was essentially supposed to be like an interim organization whereby REREC facilitate power coverage in rural areas, and then
Yes.
Kenya Power come and take over once the infrastructure has been set. These are the poles and the wires. So that's been going on up to date. Actually, the last mile connectivity is actually going on, and it's a major pillar as far as government is concerned. In fact, the reason as to why the Rural Electrification Authority was to REREC is because they started having an aspect of renewable energy, and this was partly to do with foreign donors who are really keen on social impact and renewable energy projects. So that, on one hand, is happening. The one thing which is not properly happening is actual transition of once guys in the rural areas have been connected by the REREC, the Rural Renewable Energy Organization. How do we now transition those particular individuals to Kenya Power? That there's a gap in there.
Yes.
And that gap has actually been taken up by a lot of solar companies. If you go to any rural areas, you'll find so many solar companies, the likes of Sun King, others I may not be in a position to mention, who have actually done so much in terms of giving power to guys in the rural area.
Yes.
So you've mentioned something which is very crucial, of coverage and the footprint which can potent power consumers in the country are in the cities, Kisumu, Nairobi, Mombasa, maybe if coverage can, there'll be position to increase their revenue. One thing I may need to mention, if you look at the mismatch, as far as Kenya Power is concerned in terms of their expenditure, the capital expenditure versus the revenue they're generating, Kenya Power may at some point in time need some sort of stimulus, like an interim stimulus of a few billion Kenya shillings, just to try and bridge that gap before they stabilize. If you look at what we've mentioned before in terms of the rural coverage, urban coverage, the expenditures, the power purchase agreements, it's one of those things. It's like a domino kind of thing which needs several things to be happening at the same time. So they may need a stimulus just to try and stabilize them, cover some of the capital expenditures, renegotiate their power purchase agreements, and of course have a way of working together with REREC so that all those guys who are being connected by REREC, at some point in time, they will transition now to Kenya Power.
Yes.
If you've done construction in the rural areas, you'll know how connection is at all order. They have you have to be somewhere close to the nearest up, depending on transformer. And Kenya Power at some point in time tried to come up with a product which was named Umeme Pamoja. Even at some point in time partnered with Equity Bank, whereby guys in rural areas could actually come together, cover the costing between where they are and the nearest transformer. And at some point in time, it worked well. But it was a tall order to some people in the village, because if you're so far from your nearest transformer, the cost becomes extremely high. Equity tried to plug in by giving soft loans, but it hasn't worked very well in terms of increasing the coverage. So from where I sit, they may need an interim stimulus plan, and then, of course, prudent management. And then I think from there, they will be in a position to come back to their feet. It's very possible, and I feel it's something which the government may need to look at.
Pretty much. Arnold, I beg that we take a short break. Once we come back, let's talk about another area for the government that is not really taken as they need to. Case in point, this NHIF bill that looks to push the country into universal health care. For those who know, UHC. Now, we do know that you're supposed to pay 350 shillings according to the bill, but then there's another proposal in the bill to have these rates reviewed each and every 5 years. Will it be reviewed upwards or downwards? Now, for those who know the economy, then we have to factor in inflation, meaning that's another way for the government telling you that you can't pay what you've been paying for 6 years, because we know the last time it was reviewed was 6 years ago. So if you're in the informal sector, should you pay more to access the UHC? And is it going to be possible to have everybody in the country who's above 18 years of age to be encompassed in that program? Once we come back here on Economic Review.